the degree of conflict,
Polarization, yeah.
I just yesterday, the reason I was up in LA, because I live about an hour away, is one of my friends, colleagues, is a survivor of Weinstein.
Mm-hmm.
And she has put together a group called the Silence Keepers. It's really a great idea. So the women who have been impacted by Harvey Weinstein, and sadly other men in the entertainment industry have come together to create an support network. And so she actually she's not a therapist, but she's very experienced in the neurobiology of trauma. So she asked me if I would come and teach skills to the women that might help them through, the morass of what they're going through right now, because, speaking up is just the first part. They have the media following them. They have, one of them actually has her car was bugged. If you can imagine that, because of just, the truth to power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interconnected to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And at the same time, isn't that great that the Me Too movement has come forward? And maybe if there wasn't a Donald Trump, there wouldn't be a Me Too movement. I don't know, some people have said that to me before, but I just saw that in them. And, they express that they have, as much as they know that it was important for them to speak up, they're very much living in distress because it's not over. And it's not going to be over for a while. Some of them are involved in civil suits, and just in the vitriol of some people in the industry feeling like they shouldn't have said anything. And, it's such an interesting time. It's just an interesting time. But I don't know, do you think, I know I kind of went down another tributary, but does that connect to what you were talking about what you've been reading about the last 3 years?
Yeah. Well, let me just pause this because I want to get right back into that flow. And I just want to do the official hello.
Oh, okay.
Well, I am absolutely thrilled to be starting up this particular interview in this trauma series summit of 2018 in Living Resilience. I have the pleasure of speaking today with Elaine Miller Karas. And Elaine, you wrote a while back, Building Resilience to Trauma, the Trauma and Community Resiliency Models book. And I have found it one of the most useful and informative books in the field. Useful because what I'm constantly looking for is practical exercises that I can integrate into my experience right now.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't have to go to a class, and I don't have to fly somewhere, and I don't have to be a part of an agency. I can actually do this. Yes. And there are a number of things that you've included in your book that I can do that. So that's one reason I'm happy that you're here to speak with us in this trauma summit. The other is your foundational role in the various agencies and creations that I hope you'll introduce for us in the next couple of moments so we can get to know you. And then on top of that, there's what you and I were just talking about, which is what ends up looking to I think both of us, that we're talking about a multi-dimensional, a multi-layered situation in the world, and particularly in the USA, with regard to trauma. And you were just articulating how you were with a very dear friend, and she's a part of the Me Too movement. In fact, yet another little facet of that, and you were asked to come and teach them about some of the distinctions of trauma-informed organization and relationships and so on. And I definitely want us to continue that conversation. But I'm hoping that in this short time that we have with you, that we can also take it from that individual level and that small group level and even the national movement level. Mm-hmm. Because I think we both have talked about in our earlier conversations, conferences and so on, that we're really exposed to trauma at virtually every level
Yes.
now.
Sadly so, yes.
Yeah, and that includes the national, the international, the global. So I don't know how far we'll get. We only have, less than an hour to be together, and I'm so thrilled to have you. So I'm going to stop going on and on about all the facets I'd like to talk with you about. Would you say just a little bit more about what you've done, what you've created, what the
So I'm the co-founder of the Trauma Resource Institute, which I founded in 2006, co-founded. And really the idea was that there is a great possibility of bringing healing interventions to people throughout the globe, one person, one community at a time, but that needed to be simple. It needed to be based on perhaps cutting edge neuroscience. It also needed to be very user friendly so that perhaps even a child could learn these skills and teach them to another child. One of the people that we trained in another state said to me once, this really is what you've done. And I think you more or less stated that in the beginning. You read my book. It's very simple. You can do it for yourself. But this is really an accessible and affordable, a transportable and adaptable model that we've created. But it's also about the democratization of mental health, because there's so much trauma in the world, like you mentioned, in every realm of society, and that there are not enough therapists to be able to deal with the aftermath of the kinds of trauma that's going on. And even if there were enough therapists, not everyone is what we call psychologically oriented. They wouldn't necessarily turn to a therapist as their first go-to person. And so what became very clear to me is, as I've traveled the world and sharing this model, is that every culture, every community, every neighborhood, every family has a natural leader. And if I ask someone that question, well, who would you go to if there was a challenge in your life? Very few of them would say their therapist, although some would, especially in Los Angeles, where I live.
or New York.
And I'm a therapist, so I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But I think that that if we are going to make an impact on helping people to understand what's happened to their mind, body, and spirit, that I think we need different portals of entry. And for our world, oftentimes the story is what we think is the most important thing. That if I tell you my trauma story, then it will get out of me, and then somehow I will be better. And for many of us to be observed and witnessed is so very powerful, that for the first time that we've been understood and can be very powerfully healing. And then there's an asterisk or a caveat that I'll bring forward, and that is, it doesn't necessarily change the human nervous system. And so as an example of that, we have, in a very elegant design, we have our part of the brain called the amygdala, right? That sounds an alarm if there's danger. And this part of our brain is designed to generalize it to other aspects of our life that might be similar. So we might be in the grocery store, buying vegetables, and all of a sudden someone passes us. And maybe there's a smell of an aftershave, for example. And all of a sudden we start shaking, our heart beats fast, and we experience fear, and we want to run out of the grocery store. And we may not have a clue why we have experienced that. But if we look at the reason why, and you dissect that maybe later, oh, someone assaulted me when I was 19 and they were wearing that aftershave. And even though this is 30 years later, and even though I know and I've shared my story, my nervous system still sounds the alarm if something similar, right, happens, to say, get the heck out of there, because you could be in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, for those of us that have had trauma, and if it's in multi-layers, right? Not only, let's say, within our family, within our community, within the larger social political environment that we're seeing now, then those kinds of triggers can be amplified. And so, I don't want to get too far ahead of, your initial question, but I think that what we've done with our model, the community resiliency model, is that we really have democratized a set of skills that are pretty simple to learn, that can be accessed by many cultures. I've been to many places around the world. The models translated into Swahili, Creole, Nepali, Arabic,
Mm.
English, Spanish, French, and there's lots of languages, Kinyarwanda in Rwanda. And that, I've asked the same 6 questions in every single culture about how has trauma impacted your life? And the answers are the same in all cultures. And that really has been so profound to me, because I know that these symptoms are not disorders, they're common reactions. And so part of the whole, I would say the mission also of what I think is part of my life's vision is that how do we depathologize these kinds of common reactions and say, something really extraordinary happened to you, or a series of things have happened to you on a
Mhm.
personal, communal, and social political level. And of course, you're experiencing that right now. Wouldn't that be the most natural thing in the world? Some of my African American friends who tell me that every time they get in the car and a police officer is behind them, that their heart starts to beat quickly
Yeah.
and they are afraid of for their life.
Yeah.
That
Let,
makes total sense to me. I would be too.
if I could just pause you right there for a moment, I'd like to see if it's okay to insert another word in there, because I think you just said if we can depathologize some
Yes.
of these some of this dysregulation that happens for us, where I'm triggered and I don't even know I'm triggered, and I
Exactly.
certainly don't know why I'm triggered, and so on. I'm wondering if we could include in that for the rest of the conversation the notion of just how much we've normalized. So depathologizing one part of the conversation and what we've normalized, and in that way also taken it out of our awareness or off our screen. And so we have this kind of um, clueless. We seem clueless about our own condition, and we're actually, in my experience, we're immersed in daily rounds of trauma, in addition to the historical, cultural trauma, and so on. We've got some layers going on.
We do.
So, if I could just add the normalization to that occasional reaction that you were talking about, of either pathologizing, or if we can possibly depathologize
Well, I
aspects of
think,
trauma.
it's like it would probably be helpful too for you to give me your definition of what normalization means, so I know that we're both talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I claim no professional level understanding or ability to define normalization. What I have is an extensive personal um, track record now of tracking exactly what I heard you talking about, like going layer by layer into my own awareness of what's going on inside of me, learning to regulate and so on, and then also looking out at the levels around me of my intimate other, my community, the nation, and so on. And for me, normalization is to actually disappear from my experience any unique attribute of something that is actually disturbing in some way, and that disturbance could go all the way up to qualifying as trauma.
Right.
So if I learn to deny it or ignore certain inner signals or reactions, or and which are very normal reactions to have, if I deny or ignore them long enough, they become a non-thing. They become invisible to me, and I would say the same thing, only at larger scale, taking it out to the national and so on. So I'm happy to be corrected or added to.
No, no, I mean that's your definition. I think that, and there's a danger to that, because if we normalize, well, this is just the way that it is now.
Hmm.
Then do we accept a status quo that then really becomes intolerable? But if we numb ourselves to it, then sometimes we can continue to live our life, but we never embody what's going on around us that actually can lead to our collective demise. Does that make sense? Our collective demise.
Totally. I would say that that's exactly the state that we're in this country at a lethal level,
Yes.
particularly environmentally and politically. Um, the stakes are extraordinarily high.
Yes.
And so I'm happy to add that to our conversation today.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And then you think, oh my goodness, because I think for many of us, myself included, it can get pretty overwhelming. And to think, I don't know if I can listen to one more newscast. I don't know if I can hear one more report about what's happened to the protection of our wilderness lands,
Hmm.
our water. I've worked in Flint, Michigan, with lovely human beings who were being poisoned by the by the powers to be and didn't tell them,
Yeah.
and they're now dealing with the impact of that in levels that they don't even know what the ramifications are going to be
Yeah.
for their lifelong health of not only themselves but their families, their children, and how that's going to continue through the lifeline.
Yeah.
But then I if I know that if I delve too much into that, the trauma of it, then the trauma of it overwhelms me. And that's why I think I've been very involved in, as you have been, in, so what creates resiliency? What is your definition for resiliency?
Mm-hmm.
Some people call resiliency, it's interesting because I was just in Belfast, and there's a big sign in one of their big highways, and it says, don't let anyone call you resilient, because if they're calling you resilient, they're more or less doing what you're saying is normalizing your experience so that they don't have to help you. And I thought that was so interesting. Here's my model, the community resiliency model. I was there in Belfast to teach teachers in my model. And then there's this big placard that says, don't have anybody call you resilient. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's important that we even have a conversation about
Yeah.
what resiliency. You
Yeah.
know, for me, I have a definition of it, and it's really looking at personal and communal strengths, and really seeing that they exist inside of you and your community, and that you can identify what those are, and that you can thrive while you are doing your activities of daily living and feel that you are living a very purposeful and aware life in the present moment. And so when you say that, like the skills of the community resiliency model are very simple, people can integrate those skills into their lives, like interweaving them in a beautiful blanket of your lives, a tapestry of your life. They don't have to be standalone, but if you integrate them and you're at your best self, so when the traumas hit you, that you don't normalize it, you embody, oh my gosh, that was real. But then how am I going to react to that? And how am I going to be part of the solution and not a continued part of the problem?
Yeah.
Because I think we can all be pretty demoralized right now with what's happening in the world community, right? And so, I often use this metaphor, and it's about a garden. I think you've heard me say this metaphor about the garden, Dean, and that is that there's gardens all over the world. I asked this question. I said, do you have a garden in Nepal? Oh, yes, we have gardens in Nepal. Do you have a garden in Los Angeles? Do you have a garden in Oregon? Of course we do. And I'll say, well, are there weeds in your garden? And they would go, oh, yeah, there's weeds. And even though we know that there are some weeds that have medicinal, qualities to our environment and to our world, I'd say, but if you're planting your fruits and vegetables, and if you only decided to to water the weeds in your garden, what would happen to your garden? And people always tell me, well, oh, they would, the fruits and vegetables would die and the weeds would take over. Well, of course, we don't want that to happen. And even though I think that trauma is a part of human existence, I don't want trauma and the trauma that's happening in the world right now to be driving my bus. I want my resiliency and my resiliency story and my ability to look, it's like that old, famous line. I want to look at the lemons and say, okay, how can we make lemonade out of this? What
Mm-hmm.
can we learn about this? And this is what I was sharing with you before we turned on the tape. One of the amazing things I saw with working with a number of women yesterday who have broken the silence of what happened to them in the Hollywood scene. And I don't want to say more than that to not reveal their identities, is that they were courageous women
Mm-hmm.
who stood up because many of them had kept silent for many years. And
Mhm.
that what I saw in those women were courage, was humility, was strength. Yeah, it has dabblings of a bit of fear in there, but what are they doing together as a group is binding together. And many of them said, I can feel my strength inside of me, and I need to have this to go forward. And I think we also need to pay attention to that now, that
Yes.
even though that normalization has happened, and certainly the normalization of, you know, being okay to treat women in a certain way has happened, still happens. But I think with this particular movement, things are shifting. And I would hope that, because one of the ways that we, of course, encountered each other is through the Transformational Resilience Coalition that we both very much believe in, about how also groups and individuals can bind together across the world to bring about ideas of prevention regarding climate change. Because climate change impacts all of us
Mhm.
in a very, very deep level. It impacts the way we behave. It impacts whether we can grow crops. It impacts whether or not we're going to have water to feed our livestock. Um, it impacts every aspect of human existence.
Mhm.
And so how do we continue to pay attention to that as Americans, which I think many people are, even if we have an administration that has chosen, in what is inexplicable to me, that it doesn't exist, even though we have so many scientists around the world that say the other. Fortunately, I believe in your state, Oregon, and my state, California, we have two strong governors that believe in that
Mhm.
and have continued our efforts to pay attention.
Yeah.
So that's part of the resiliency of our communities. Not every state has a governor like our governors that will continue to protect in the ways that they can our populations from the disastrous impacts if we don't stop um, what's happened to our planet.
Yeah. You brought up something there that I'm curious if you have a perspective about it, and that is literally the language that we've allowed, or the language that we've cultivated um, as a nation in particular. It's not just about climate change, but it's particularly easy to point at and to speak about in that issue. And what I mean by that is, there's another person that I know you know very well, Lisa Van Susteren, who's going to be joining us
Oh,
in
good.
the same series, and I really can't wait to ask her perspective as well, as a psychiatrist and also being on the national scene, policy making scene, and so on. I am so curious how we got to a place where we literally, what we allowed, we encouraged the creation of an insane language. If I've been slowing it down for the past 3 years in particular, when I've been really in the depth of the research, and it was daunting for me to go into the climate change denial conversation. What we have is actually a minority of our population that's extraordinarily well funded, that just keeps repeating the message that this particular part of science is invalid. It is not so. It's not a real thing. And we made it okay. I literally lost count of how many times I've watched on a cable TV news or whatever, a false dialogue that allowed some paid shill for the fossil fuel industry and so on to go up against a vetted climate scientist.
Yeah.
And I think it's literally insane. That's really where I've landed. And that's what's going to be a part of my next book. I just take the gloves off, and I'm just calling it for what it is. I think we're nuts.
Well, I guess, in the model that I created, I talk about the resilient zone, or the okay zone, And that's easy. And we can be okay mad, we can be okay sad, but we still are operating from our best self because we have our prefrontal cortex available to us,
Mhm.
our executive functioning, that then has a greater capacity to weigh what's truthful, what's not truthful, to be compassionate towards ourselves, to operationalize, I think, ourselves as human beings and our totality of mind, body, and spirit in a way that serves not only ourselves, our families, and our community. And in the model that I have put together, we also talk about the high zone and the low zone. And the high zone might be what you call as the insanity. People that are seeing what, what maybe in your perception and many people's perceptions, crazy things about, what do you mean there's not climate change? How can you go against all these world scientists and every other country? I think isn't there only one other country that didn't join the climate accords? And how can we do that? I mean, it doesn't make sense. So I think there is something that happens to us as human beings, which I think is within our nervous system, and that is the fear response. And that fear response can, if that is operationalizing in us, and if that's the way that we're making decisions, then we see the world sometimes from a paranoid stance, where everyone's out to get me. No one really knows, and even people that are saying they're in the know, they're not really in the know, and it could be a conspiracy against me, because everything is viewed as a threat. And I do think it can happen when we talk about trauma. Those concepts that can get really, the tracks are laid early on, can arise from childhood trauma. And so you've had so many things happen to you over the years that amygdala that we know has a negativity focus. And then if you don't have anybody watering the flowers in your garden, then all you see is everything is bad. Everything is about someone's trying to get me. Everything's about, if we don't bound together in our particular way of thinking about things, then the world is going to be destroyed. We lose our compassion, and we lose our ability to see middle ground. We're only seeing the extremes, and I think we're seeing that all over the world right now.
Mhm.
And we're seeing extremes of both ways of thinking. People that are ultimate progressives and ultimate conservatives. And sometimes there's very little room on either side of saying, well, how can we try to meet in the middle to try to even solve the problem? But if we're both in polar extremes, it's hard to do that.
Mhm.
So, I think one of my answers to this, and I remember feeling very, a little bit down when some of the climate change things and some of the other social political things were happening in December of 2016. And a good buddy of mine, her name's Leslie Carroll in Belfast, said, Elaine, if anything, right now, we need the community resiliency model more than ever, not only here in Belfast, but in your country, in the United States.
Mhm.
And, I think she was right, because when we learn to read our nervous system, when we learn to tell the difference between sensations of distress and well-being inside of ourselves, and if we decide to choose to pay attention to our sensations of well-being, that grows. I've seen it all over the world grow. But oftentimes, all we can see, we have tunnel vision, because trauma is about tunnel vision, is that we just see the trauma. We see what people have done to us. Everything is about us being victimized, rather than saying, okay, yes, this happened. I don't ever want to forget that happened. But how can I go forward in my life in a different way? Because I'm not saying at all to not acknowledge and appreciate that many times we become very strong advocates because of the traumas that we've experienced.
Mhm.
That can be a very resilient thing. But I think that somehow right now in our world community, we've somehow gone askew, and it does worry me as well.
Mhm.
Being kind of an old dog right now and not as young as I used to be. And in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this.
Mhm.
But I've talked to lots of people. My father-in-law, he's still living. He's 104. And, the remembrances of things in the 30s, before World War II, before the horrible Holocaust and the deaths of so many, millions of people. Um, there was a similar kind of vitriol, and that worries me.
Mhm.
That's why I think people like you, like me, people that believe that there's a possibility of bringing ourselves into a more resilient state of being personally, and how that can, like the pebble in the stream, continue to have impacts in a positive way to others, I think is really important, that we don't lose that, and we not normalize that, oh well, this is just how it is now.
Mhm.
No, it doesn't have, it doesn't need to be how it's going to be in the future. There
Yeah.
may be a certain reality right now, but I also want to look at what's grown out of the reality of the harshness. Somebody told me a long time ago, it was actually a Catholic priest when I was working with Catholic Charities after the horrible hurricanes in New Orleans. And he said to me, I'm realizing, as awful as this has been, that I do see the lotus blossom emerging. And he said, in India, the lotus blossom, and excuse my French, emerges from the shit.
Mhm.
And so I think we have to remember that. Um, so I guess I have to say that even with all of that, not wanting to normalize, as you say, I also want to remember that the other's possible as well, and
Yeah.
not lose sight of that. And if we don't water that right now, I think we're all going to be lost. We need to water what's resilient amongst us.
Yeah.
Me looking at those women and just at the end saying, "You are so courageous. You are amazing, and I feel your strength, and I won't be the same after being with them yesterday afternoon."
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate what you're saying, and there's a sobriety to how you're saying it. I'm not really in the mood, and I don't think any of the folks watching this series are in the mood for getting all fluffed up and dosed with positive thinking and so on. What I hear you really orienting us toward um, that which I would say is an innate gift we were all given, really a birthright.
Yes,
But
nice
our
way to put it.
culture is so extraordinarily destructive to that little gem in each of us. So what I could see you doing with the women that you were just working with
Mm-hmm.
is that you're really inviting them to bring that little gem back out and polish it some together.
Oh, I love the way you said that. I think that's exactly true. One of the women she was really spunky, and she said, people tell me I need to do positive affirmations. If one more person tells me to do a positive affirmation, and she said, but when you asked me, what uplifts you? What makes you feel calmer? And she described this beautiful scene of her being in her living room on her sofa with the light coming in a certain way. And I could just see her take a very deep breath. And you could just see her connectedness to herself. She felt the connectedness to herself. And I think when we have the ability to do that,
Mm-hmm.
we walk in the world as better people and better citizens, and better expressive, authentic um, ambassadors for what we believe in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not about positive thinking. I think it's about connecting to what's true inside of yourself,
Right.
because part of what's true might be suffering, but saying, yeah, I can sense the suffering. In fact, one of the women said, oh, I can sense the suffering, but I can also sense the resiliency. That it's possible that both things can exist, and that to know the suffering is there and part of this is part of the story, and an important part to remember, but also the resiliency is there, and you can sense your own connectedness of how you want to be present with what's happened to you in your life and what's happening to us in our world.
Right.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing that we do have that capacity.
There's something from your book that I think overlaps with some of the work that we do, which is the notion of bearing witness for one another. And another kind of jargon for it is to hold space for one another,
Yes.
to have a safe circle, whatever the form, whatever the reason that people are getting together, that it's safe enough that people can actually be,
Yes.
can be with the perhaps the easier emotions and events to share, and also the harder ones. And that's what I'm hearing with you in that is that there's an innately healing quality when we bear witness with one another, when we safely hold space for
Yes.
another. Is that consistent in your
Oh,
experience of your work?
absolutely. And I mean, I think that, and that's what human beings have done forever, right? Through the millennia, is how people have come together to support one another. And I think that when we do that, it affirms our humanity
Hmm.
and also our connectivity. And one of the things I've seen in the world, in my experience, I've seen more similarities than I've seen differences.
Hmm.
Might have a different skin color, we might have a different faith from each other, but when we come down to it, it's about taking care of our families, our children. It's about making sure we have enough to eat, making sure we have a safe place to live.
Hmm.
I mean, there's so many essential ingredients that are the same, but also what's the same is this elegant design of the nervous system.
Hmm.
I've asked that question about what uplifts you to people all over the world, and the answers are just as diverse as our humanity. And yet there's that same human response. If someone in Nepal tells me it's about a Buddhist temple that they like to visit, and they take a deep, deep, beautiful breath, and you can see an expansiveness come over them and
Hmm.
a sense of well-being. Or if it's me as a grandmother talking about my granddaughter, and I can sense a wholeness come inside of me, because of my connectedness to that little child. It's so diverse what really does bring us to those places of
Yeah.
our authenticity.
Elaine, I'm wondering if I could ask you a question that um, I'm guessing that you have a number of incidents or examples that might respond to it. My question is, you must have had diverse groups in whatever cities or countries you've worked in. You know, the neighborhoods, they. It seems like it would be rare that everyone would be in the same from the same political point of view that's sitting in the room. They would all be in the same socioeconomic status in the room. They'd be the same gender in the room. You know, you've got a lot of differences going on. It's kind of at least a something of a melting pot in every group. Safe to say?
Well, I don't know if I would call it a melting pot, but yes, there is diversity always, and there's people that, and I say this as, I'm the executive director of the Trauma Resource Institute, and we don't ascribe to a political party, but I do ascribe to calling something forward that I'm concerned about. Like, for example, being concerned about our children. And I remember talking to a man in Belfast who, he really admired our present president, but he said, but I don't agree with him about the kids. He goes, you can't take kids away from their children, for their parents rather. And so, I try to see, no matter where we are on the spectrum, in whatever our beliefs are, let's say politically, if we can get into that space of sensing our best self, then sometimes people can work on both sides of the aisle to compromise and to create solutions that will be in the betterment for all.
Right.
But as long as we sit in these diverse, like, camps on one side or the other, it doesn't bode well for trying to create the solutions to make a better world.
Mm-hmm.
I had and also when we talk about, racial disparities, and certainly I have so many friends that are telling me how they feel from the other and talk to me about white privilege. And I am a white woman, and I certainly do not know what it's like to be a person of color right now. But I had the kind of, I always say, the most wonderful experience as a child growing up, because of my mother and grandmother immigrating to this country from El Salvador. And so my grandmother had very dark skin. My mother had very light skin. I have light skin like my mom. So it was this thing about seeing all colors within my family,
Mhm.
but we were all family and we loved each other. And it wasn't until I was quite older that I realized that my grandmother could be treated differently. We were in Texas and our car had broken down and we were going to go have something to eat. And there was a placard in the saying, "No Mexicans allowed." And my grandmother looked at it and said, "No, we can't go there, Elaine." And I just said, "Why can't we go there?" You know, we called her Licky, abuelita. And so then she explained to me. But before that, I didn't know because our family was our family. And so I hope that I convey that in our work that we do when we go to different countries and we have so much diversity, that I want to see I want to respect the differences and want to listen to what those differences are in terms of sometimes how I have to shape and learn about shaping my language differently, shaping the way or things that I need to know that I don't know, because I have been fortunate to be of privilege in many ways and don't know what that's like. But I also want to never lose sight of the commonalities that we have with all people.
Mhm.
And I just have seen that everywhere I've gone is the similarity we have in this amazing, elegant design of the nervous system, that
Mhm.
regardless of our skin color or our faith or our age, we are designed in the same way around the whole world.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, gosh, I'm already a little concerned that our window of time is shrinking. I'm wondering if you could suggest a few resources or directions for folks who are engaged in this series. They're wanting to expand their own inner toolkit, their own address their own family, or maybe they have a little growing support group that they're in, or they'd like to start one. Um, are there resources, and I'm hoping you'll be straight up about what you and TRI offer and so on,
Yeah.
but,
So,
but are there other authors? Are there books? Are there
yeah. So I
agencies?
think that one of the things I will say is that I think it's important. Um, I wanted to make things accessible. So we have an app called ichillapp.com. You can actually go online and listen to it, but you also can access it through a smartphone. And it's on, the Apple store, it's on the Droid store. And I know that you might be able to flash that later, ichill.com, or
I
I just the I app. It's
if we
iChill.
I
It's free.
chill.
It's free. But they can also go to our website, traumaresourceinstitute.com. And we have many things, that they can look at on the website. I think, you mentioned my book. My book has, is a good resource. I tried to really make it user friendly for people to read. But I think there's also, I would also suggest that people check out the Transformational Resilience Coalition, because there are a number of people, a number of organizations who joined forces, and their websites are on that website that you can click and learn about more resources. What we do within the Trauma Resource Institute is we are trying to scale and create capacity by training people to be teachers of a community resiliency model.
Mhm.
And so we do a lot of trainings around the country, around the world, teaching people how to teach the skills, so then they can teach their own community, their own family. They can bring the model with their own cultural lens to whomever it might be.
Mhm.
So people can check out our website for when we're offering. We don't offer the public training very often, but we do usually do it once or twice a year. And that's one way to create more capacity in terms of those kinds of menu options of interventions to bring to your community. I would say the other thing, I always get worried if people think, oh, this is the only one way. I think that we need a lot of different things.
Mhm.
And we have learned through our model that just movement, Tai Chi, going for walks with good friends, having times that you can converse if you belong to a spiritual community, having regular times that you can spend in either meditation or contemplative prayer. I mean, those are usually available and they don't cost a lot of money. You can go to the local church, they don't usually charge you to get in. But those kinds of awareness practices, I think, for all of us, can really shift the way that we walk in the world.
Mhm.
And probably why we have religion, because somebody figured that out a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
Um, so those kinds of resources are also really important. Um, so I think that's all. I mean, that's kind of a lot of things to go to, and we have lots of resources on our website that people can go to and explore.
Mhm. Well, the last couple of questions that I'd like to ask you, and you're welcome to just riff in any direction that feels good to you. I'm wondering if, um, with all that you have seen in your career in this particular unusual industry, um, and especially in the past couple of years now, are there particular pieces of our um, turbulent times that really concern you, that really get your attention, and that you make a point of tracking?
I'm really concerned about children right now.
Mm-hmm.
I did a training for a school district recently, and they were telling me that the children were really suffering and children were scared. And I asked them if they could tell me more, and they said, well, it's so interesting. And they think a lot of it has to do with the political situation. That children, for example, children who were from um, the origins of Latin America, like my own family, if they were children of color, that sometimes other children would say, oh, now our president's going to send you back. And these are children that are totally here legally. And even if they weren't here legally, I mean, I think that's really scary for children to hear that kind of thing coming at them. And then on the other hand, they told me that some of the children were if they knew that, for example, that the children's parents voted for Trump, they were bullying those kids. So you see, bullying is not good, no matter who's going and what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that no matter where you are on the political spectrum, our children are suffering. I don't want our children to suffer. I would like them to learn about compassion and ethics and how to go forward in being able to express their opinions and their ideology as a democratic republic in a way that we can say, even though I think differently from you, you have the right to think that. And
Yeah.
you have the right for safety. Children should have safety. And so I am really concerned about our kids right now. And
Yeah.
children get worried. I mean, when I met some wonderful people in Flint, Michigan, and they told me about the worries of their children. Is it safe to drink the water, mommy?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a primary. If we don't have water, we cannot live. Again,
Yeah.
it's about our children. And how do we want to raise our kids? What do we want them to be safe? Do we want them to think that um, that a person, because they have a different political party, are bad people? I mean, I wouldn't want that for my own child. Even though I might have strong beliefs about something, I want them to be able to talk to people about the differences, because it changes us to learn about people who think differently from us if we can do it with respect of each other and not hatred. So I
Yeah.
think that by far, I mean, I have been very anguished about seeing these children at the border being ripped away from their parents.
Yeah.
And we still have hundreds that they don't even know how they're going to find them. And I think that comes from a very personal level, just like that cab driver right in Belfast. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter. I can't imagine what would happen to her little psyche if she was taken away from my daughter right now,
Mm-hmm.
or from me. And it kind of goes back to the golden rule: do unto others as you would have done to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we live more by that, and that most religions have some form of that statement. I actually looked it up one time, and I had them in all the different religions. They were just off. They were stated just a little bit differently, but not much.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I think we have to be. I don't want to say either, in my own humility, that I haven't been perfect about this. Sometimes I get angry about things that I see, and I'm not in my resilient zone. So I have to work at being in my resilient zone. I think that would be the other thing I want to say to everyone. We all get bumped out of our zone. We can get bumped in high or low, but it's whether or not we can get back in again. and say, okay, even though I was there and maybe I said something I shouldn't have said, I'm so sorry. Let's start again. I'll get back in there and let me hear what I wasn't able to hear about why this is so important to you. So it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it seems ironic that in my experience, the past 3 years have been literally an explosion of awareness across the country of what's called ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences research and subsequent programs. That the point of it and the center of that research is exactly what you're talking about. It is so incredibly volatile and explosive now. So I hear you, and it's also literally heartbreaking for me to think
No,
that
it
there's
is.
almost nothing else we could be doing that more traumatizes us as a country than to be attacking the well-being and the experience um, of having a place in the world for our children.
Yeah,
Um,
to be
yeah,
safe.
heartbreaking.
Well, and I want to say, as you say that, um, there is a wonderful a school in Asheville, North Carolina. It's called Vance Elementary School, and one of their teacher counselors sent me a little video of a little boy. He looks like he's about 10 years old or so, and the school has adopted the community resiliency model. And so the teacher is talking to a group of children. They're all sitting on the floor. And the teacher says, well, what do you think about CRIM, about the community resiliency model? And this one little boy raises his hand. He goes, I think it's a good thing. He goes like, I get angry and I may be getting a fight on the school ground. And then I remember my CRIM skills and I remember to do them. And then all of a sudden I feel like myself again. I can go back in the classroom then and I can learn. And it doesn't really serve me to be so angry like that. Out of the mouth of a babe. You see, that to me is hope.
Yeah.
Is if I can bring this to that teacher, her name is Mitzi, and she can bring that counselor, and bring it to the kids there and to the teachers, and that one little boy starts saying, I can get into my zone and maybe I can be a better person. Maybe he'll be the next president of the United States. Who knows? Who knows? But if we can teach children how to tell the difference between sensations of distress and well-being, and then have a choice to decide to pour water on their well-being, wow, could we change the world? I think so. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel, I don't think that's a lofty, hope. And it's kind of like ending on, one of the things that's exciting for me is we have a community resiliency model teacher in Atlanta, and he shared our model with a group of people working on a curriculum that's being sponsored by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so the community resiliency model is part of what's called the C Project, and they've referenced us in it. And it is chapter 2 of that curriculum. And I just learned a month ago that His Holiness has directed his folks at Emory to implement this in all the Tibetan schools in India and in Nepal. And so I know that besides the wonderful ethical and compassionate learnings of His Holiness, that the model that we've created at the Trauma Resource Institute will be part of that curriculum. Because when children can do that, then they can open up their hearts and their minds to compassion. But if they're stuck in trauma, like the Adverse Child Experiences study has taught us,
Mhm.
it's harder for them to be able to pay attention, to be able to breathe in the teachings that are so important for all of our children in the world to know.
Elaine, is there a link or a name for that program that I could post?
So it's SEE Project and Emory University, and if you put that in, they now have videos up and there's links to it. And what they're hoping to do is to bring it throughout the world, not just to Tibetan schools. So people can look at that curriculum, and it's for K through 12.
Mm-hmm.
some really wonderful people from the social and emotional learning communities throughout the world who've been a part of that. And I'm also feel very honored to have been a consultant to that project as well.
And is that Emory, Emery?
Emory, Emory.
Ory. Thank you. I'll look that up, and I'll be sure that we include those links for folks.
I can send you. I have the link somewhere in my email. So if you can't find it, I can send it to you as well.
Great, great. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time together, and I unfortunately have a number of things that you've mentioned that I want to explore in depth. So I don't know how we'll do that, but we'll do that at some later time.
Well, we can do it again. This is the second time we've done it. It's always nice to talk to you, Dean, about the things that I know that we both believe in.
Yeah. And it is an extraordinary time, as much as I think a number of us might be feeling like it's time to wind down or to, back away from the big action that is called for in the world, and rightly so, because there are new people that are coming in with new ideas and new energy. But I just really want to publicly thank you and acknowledge you for all the quality of presence and heart. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Well, you know how I say you notice those tears. Just notice them, because we have to notice our tears. They can be tears.
There truly, in my experience, there is a calling of these times.
Yes.
You heard a long time ago. I think in my own way, I heard it a long time ago.
Yes.
And we've been doing what we can. It just seems, I'm hard pressed to find a more relevant and important direction of study, of creating agencies and interventions and offerings to the world. So I really just want to thank you for all that you've created, and your team. I think you all are a blessing, and it's really been a pleasure to have you be a part of this particular series where we're hoping to just really get the word out about what it's like to just be aware of our world through a frame of we are encountering trauma, whether we're conscious of it or not. There's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately being able to step into that next part of the garden and be able to, the garden you talk about, and to be able to see that, yes, there is trauma going on and we have choices. And so let's learn about these choices as we walk around this garden.
Absolutely. We have to learn about the choices. And I think, I just kind of also what you're saying, what struck me is that, there's lots of people that don't necessarily know what they experienced was trauma and yet they're affected by it. Right. And so, because trauma has become kind of a dirty word too, is people don't want to say, oh, you're traumatized. But we can say, well, maybe something extraordinary happened to you and it dysregulated your nervous system. It's about the biology of how we're all created. It may have affected your thoughts, your feelings, how you act in the world, because maybe even some of the things that you do that you don't like have to do with your trying to just feel better because of these kind of adverse childhood experiences. Yeah. I'm so glad they didn't call it traumatic childhood experiences. I think that our births made it more acceptable for us to hear it. And I appreciate Dr. Folletti and Enda for describing it in that way.
Right. So again, thank you so much for joining us in this pre-recorded section of this series. And hopefully we will now be shifting gears into some live Q&A with you.
All right, great. Thank you.